Most people think loving a dog well is about the big things, the expensive food, the long walks, the overflowing toy basket. But research suggests something very different. There are small moments happening inside your home every single day that can register in your dog's brain more powerfully than any expensive treat or fancy toy. And here's the surprising part. Most dog owners are already doing some of them. They're just not doing them quite the right way. It starts with something as simple as eye contact. Every time you share soft, relaxed eye contact with your dog and they hold your gaze back, something happens inside both of you at almost the same time. In 2015, researchers at Azabu University in Japan published a study in the journal Science that looked at oxytocin levels in 30 dog owner pairs. When the dogs and their owners engaged in mutual eye contact, oxytocin increased in both of them. The same bonding hormone, the same moment, two completely different species. Researchers then repeated the experiment with wolves that had been raised around humans. The same hormonal loop didn't happen. That suggests this isn't just a general animal response to being looked at. It's something that appears to have developed specifically through the relationship between dogs and humans. So the next time your dog looks into your eyes, don't immediately glance away. If they're relaxed and comfortable, hold that gaze softly for a few seconds. You're giving your dog access to a biological bonding mechanism that's incredibly unique to the relationship we share with them. But eye contact isn't the only thing your dog is paying attention to. The way you talk to them may matter just as much. You know that voice you probably use with your dog, the slightly higher pitch, the exaggerated excitement, the voice you would never use while talking to another adult in public. It turns out that voice is doing real neurological work. But there's an important detail most people miss. It's not just how you say something, it's also what you're saying. In 2018, researchers at the University of York studied 37 adult dogs. They played recordings using that warm, exaggerated dog-directed voice paired with words that were actually relevant to dogs. Then they used the same warm tone but paired it with completely irrelevant words. They also tested ordinary adult speech. The dog showed the strongest response when the warm tone was paired with words that actually carried meaning for them. So yes, your tone matters, but your words matter too. A 2016 fMRI study found something similar. When awake dogs listened to human speech, their brains processed words with a left hemisphere bias, the same general pattern humans use when processing language. And the reward areas of the brain became active most strongly when the positive tone and the positive meaning of the words came together. In other words, your dog isn't simply hearing your happy voice. They're processing the sound of your voice and the meaning behind it together, and that combination can determine whether their reward system lights up. Now here's where things get especially interesting. What happens when you walk through the front door? For years, popular advice about separation anxiety told dog owners to ignore their dogs when they came home. Don't reward the excitement. Keep your arrival calm and neutral. The theory was simple. If you want a calm dog, don't reinforce an excited greeting. But research has started to challenge that idea. A 2021 survey of nearly 2,000 dog owners found something surprising. Owners of dogs with separation-related problems actually reported using calmer, lower arousal greetings than owners of dogs without those problems. The calmer the greeting, the worse the separation behavior tended to be. In other words, the advice may have been getting the cause and effect backward. Another study, published in 2014, measured oxytocin and cortisol around reunions between dogs and humans. Physical contact combined with a verbal greeting was the only condition that kept oxytocin elevated after the interaction ended. Now that study involved laboratory dogs rather than typical family pets, so it shouldn't be treated as the final word. But combined with the real-world survey, it points in an interesting direction. When you come home, don't be afraid to acknowledge your dog. Get down to their level, say their name, give them some affection. That reunion is a short emotional window, and once it passes, so does part of that hormonal response. And speaking of giving your dog something they actually want, there's another everyday habit most owners accidentally get wrong: the walk. Most walks are built around human convenience. You have a destination. You have a certain distance in mind. You walk at a pace that keeps the whole thing moving efficiently. From your dog's perspective, that can feel less like an adventure and more like being escorted somewhere. But your dog's nose is telling them an entirely different story. In 2019, researchers divided 20 dogs into two groups for 2 weeks. One group participated in structured heel work. The other did nose work, following scents, searching freely, and choosing where to stop and how long to investigate. Before and after the 2 week period, the dogs completed a cognitive bias test. This is a validated way researchers can measure whether an animal tends to interpret ambiguous situations more optimistically or pessimistically. The result was striking. The dogs that had been given more freedom to use their noses became measurably more optimistic. The dogs doing structured heel work showed no comparable change, same amount of time, completely different psychological outcome. That's because sniffing isn't just something dogs do to pass the time. Exploring scents gives them information, control, and mental stimulation, and it engages reward pathways in a way that simply walking from point A to point B doesn't. So at least once today, try something different. Let your dog lead with their nose. Follow the interesting smell instead of following your planned route. You might cover less ground, but your dog may finish the walk in a much better emotional state. And if you think your dog always needs to lose the tug-of-war game, this next one might change your mind. There's a long-standing belief that you should always win when playing tug with your dog. The idea is that if your dog wins, they'll become more dominant. They'll think they're in charge. They'll become harder to control. But researchers actually tested this. In a 2002 study, 14 golden retrievers participated in repeated tug-of-war sessions. In some sessions, the dog always won. In others, the dog always lost. And the supposed dominance effect. It wasn't there. Who won had no meaningful effect on the dog's dominance-related behavior scores. But something else did change. The dogs became more attentive and responsive to their owners after playing, regardless of who won. And the dogs that were naturally more playful actually showed more focus toward their owners after the sessions where they were allowed to win. There's another detail here that's easy to overlook. Research looking at how handlers behaved during play found that warm verbal praise and physical affection were associated with lower cortisol afterward. Disciplinary behavior during the same kind of play was associated with a rise in cortisol, so the important question isn't who ends up holding the rope, it's how your dog feels while they're playing with you, and that same principle becomes even more powerful when you bring training into the picture. You might think food is the ultimate reward for a dog, but your praise may be more valuable than you realize. In a 2016 fMRI study, researchers taught 15 dogs to associate different symbols with either food or verbal praise from their owner. For many of the dogs, the reward center of the brain responded similarly to praise and food. For some dogs, praise actually produced a stronger response than food, and those same dogs were later given a choice between running toward food or running toward their owner. They chose their owner. That tells us something important about how powerful the human-dog bond can become. But there's another side to training that matters just as much. The method you use. Dogs trained with aversive methods showed higher cortisol during training and more pessimistic behavior in situations outside the training environment. It was as if the stress of training was spilling over into the rest of their day. Reward-based training, on the other hand, was associated with calmer, more confident behavior and a stronger relationship with the owner. And you don't need an hour-long training session. Try just 3 minutes before your dog's meal. Practice a few simple behaviors. Give clear feedback. Reward the things they get right. Because to your dog, your praise isn't just noise. Their brain can learn to recognize it as a meaningful reward, and that value builds over time. But there's one final habit that may be the easiest of all, and ironically, it requires you to do almost nothing. Just sit with your dog. In one study involving newly sheltered dogs, researchers compared 3 situations: a person simply sitting in the same room, a person actively petting the dog, and a person playing with the dog. All 3 situations produced similar reductions in cortisol compared with dogs that had no human presence. Simply having a calm human nearby could be enough. No commands, no games, no constant touching, just being there. But a 2025 study adds another layer to this that completely changes how we should think about it. Researchers followed 85 dog owner pairs and measured cortisol levels in both over time. The factor that most consistently affected the dog's stress wasn't whether the owner had a stressful job, it was whether the owner brought that stress home mentally. In other words, work-related rumination, the inability to mentally leave work behind, was strongly connected with the dog's stress levels. Your dog may be responding less to what you're doing and more to the emotional state you're carrying into the room. And that makes this final habit much more important than it sounds. Once a day, close the laptop, put the phone down, sit next to your dog, and actually be there. Because your dog is already paying attention to your internal state, the only question is what they're picking up from you. And here's the thing about all of these moments. None of them require expensive equipment. You don't need an hour-long routine. You don't need to completely change the way you live with your dog. Sometimes it's just holding eye contact a few seconds longer, giving them a genuinely warm greeting when you walk through the door, letting them stop and sniff instead of rushing them through the walk, letting them win the game once in a while, giving them 3 focused minutes of positive training, or simply sitting beside them without asking them to do anything. The bond between you and your dog isn't imaginary. It's reflected in hormones, brain activity, reward systems, and stress responses. It's biological, it's measurable, and it's being built or quietly worn down in those tiny everyday moments most people barely notice. So if this changed the way you think about the little things you do with your dog, subscribe and leave a comment below. Which one of these are you going to try first?